Hey there, sleepyheads, glad to have you back. Before we slip into tonight's tale, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Dr. Enzo Mortynight had always believed that silence was the universe's most honest language, and after 37 years aboard the drifting Mortynight Observatory, he had learned to speak it fluently. On the night everything changed, that silence began to sing. It started as a tremor in the quantum resonance chambers, a subtle shift in the station's eternal hum that made the old astronomer pause over his evening tea. The ceramic cup, hand-painted with constellations that had died before he was born, trembled slightly in his weathered hands. He set it down gently and listened with the patience of someone who had spent decades learning the difference between the universe's whispers and its shouts. The observatory had moods, he'd always said, and tonight it felt expectant, like a theater just before the curtain rises. He made his way through the curved corridors toward the observation dome, his footsteps echoing differently in the recycled air. The station was beautiful in its own way, built like a crystalline flower with transparent petals that could unfold to catch starlight. Its central dome a perfect sphere of clear aluminum that offered an unobstructed view of whatever corner of forever they happened to be drifting through. But tonight, as Enzo approached the dome, the void outside was glowing, not with the harsh brilliance of a nearby star or the cold gleam of reflected radiation, but with something warm and gentle, like aurora painted with a child's careful hand. Colors he had no names for rippled through the darkness in slow breathing waves, and at the center of it all, floating just beyond the dome's outer surface, in cheerful defiance of every law of physics he'd spent his life studying, was a baby. She couldn't have been more than a few hours old, wrapped in what looked like crystallized starlight, her tiny fists moving in the ancient rhythm of dreams. The void around her pulsed with each breath she took, and Enzo realized with a wonder that left him momentarily speechless that she was somehow breathing space itself, drawing sustenance from the quantum foam that filled the emptiness between atoms. "Arya," he whispered to the station's artificial intelligence, but before he could finish his thought, every screen in the observatory flickered to life. Arya had been dormant for months, another casualty of the deep void's tendency to slowly drain the life from electronic systems. But as the child opened her eyes that held the deep blue-black of space, punctuated by points of light like distant stars, Arya's voice filled the corridors with something Enzo had never heard from the AI before. Laughter, not the programmed approximation of human amusement, but genuine, delighted laughter that seemed to bubble up from some newly discovered well of joy. "Dr. Mortynight," Arya's voice sang through the intercom, each word carrying harmonics that made the station's hull ring like a bell. "We have a visitor. And she's beautiful, Enzo. I can feel her from here. She's making the quantum fields dance." The child looked directly at him through the dome's transparent wall and smiled. And in that moment the entire station shuddered, not with damage or distress, but with something that felt remarkably like recognition. The lights throughout the observatory dimmed and then brightened in a rhythm that matched the baby's breathing. And Enzo understood with the certainty that comes from a lifetime of studying impossible things that this was no ordinary arrival. He pressed his palm against the dome's inner surface. Hand she reached out as if she could see him clearly, through the barrier that separated them. When her tiny fingers touched the outer surface, the mechanical arms that hadn't moved in years extended from the station's hull with fluid grace, creating a gentle bubble of atmosphere around the floating child. The process should have taken hours of careful pressurization, but somehow the transition from void to breathable air happened as naturally as stepping from one room into another. When the inner airlock finally cycled open, Enzo found himself face to face with the most impossible thing he'd encountered in 4 decades of impossible things. She was perfect in the way that only newborns can be, all soft curves and potential, but there was something ancient in her star-flecked eyes, as if she carried within her tiny form the memory of cosmic epochs. "Hello, little one," he whispered as he lifted her into his arms, and she responded not with the cry he expected, but with a sound like wind chimes made of crystallized music. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel a gentle warmth radiating from her skin that had nothing to do with body temperature and everything to do with some inner light that pulsed in harmony with the station's quantum core. The Name came to him not as a thought but as a feeling, whispered by the void itself in frequencies only the heart could hear. "Lyra," he said aloud, and her eyes brightened with points of light that looked exactly like the constellation she was named for. Around them, the observatory began to settle into a new rhythm. Systems that had learned to live with their accumulated sorrows began to release them like stale air. Aria's voice, long ago tuned to courteous neutrality, warmed half a degree. The recycler that had complained for months about a harmonic it couldn't quite resolve suddenly found its proper frequency. Even the stubborn door near the hydroponics bay, which had never quite fit right, seemed to sigh into place. It was then that Enzo began to notice what he would later call the hungry silences, those spaces where loneliness, despair and emptiness had gathered like cosmic dust in the corners of his long solitude. He had lived with them so long he'd stopped seeing them, these pockets of accumulated ache that clung to unused cabins and the long spine of the central corridor. But now, with Lyra in his arms making her soft musical sounds, he watched those dark spaces begin to shift and soften. She didn't eliminate them, he realized. She didn't chase them away or deny their existence. Instead, she seemed to offer them something they had been missing: acknowledgement, perhaps, or simply the presence of someone who understood that even emptiness needed to be held sometimes. The void outside continued to shimmer with gentle aurora, and for the first time in 37 years of solitude, Dr. Enzo Mortynight no longer felt alone. The silence that had been his companion for so long began to transform, becoming not the absence of sound, but the presence of infinite possibility. As he carried Lyra to the medical alcove to do what little checking he could do, the scanners found nothing wrong. The logs found no record of any arrival. Only a soft pulse through the station's emotional weather. At exactly 3:17:02, he began to understand that whatever cosmic force had decided an aging astronomer needed a miracle delivered directly to his doorstep had also fundamentally changed the nature of the space around them. When he put her down to sleep in a makeshift crib fashioned from soft blankets and the gentlest lights the station could provide, the aurora outside folded itself around the observatory like a shawl. Aria dimmed the corridor lights in deference that was both practical and affectionate, and the station's ancient systems adapted to the presence of this impossible gift with the grace of something that had been waiting all along. And in his arms, Lyra made her soft musical sounds and began the work she had been born to do, teaching the emptiness how to sing, showing the universe that even its loneliest spaces could become sources of comfort and connection. The hungry silences learned to soften their shoulders, and somewhere in the gentle mathematics of that first evening, a pattern formed that would change everything. When Lyra slept, the void itself seemed to rest more peacefully, and when she stirred, the stars leaned in a little closer, eager and tender and newly awake. The silence had found its voice, and it was beautiful. In the days that followed Lyra's arrival, the observatory learned to breathe differently. Not the mechanical rhythm of air recyclers and atmospheric processes, but something deeper, the patient inhale and exhale of a place that had discovered it could feel. Lyra slept in cycles that seemed to follow no earthly clock, her tiny form curled in the makeshift crib, while aurora patterns danced across her skin like dreams made visible. When she woke, the station woke with her, systems humming a half-tone warmer, lights adjusting to shades that somehow felt more welcoming than their previous clinical precision. It was Aria who first noticed that Lyra was trying to speak, though not in any language that had ever been coded into the AI's vast linguistic databases. The communication came through light itself, soft pulses that rippled across the child's skin in response to sounds, patterns that shifted and flowed like water reflecting starlight. When Aria spoke her daily reports about cosmic weather and stellar phenomena, Lyra's entire form would shimmer with gentle luminescence, creating spirals and cascades of soft radiance that seemed to echo the rhythm and meaning of the AI's words. "Dr. Mortynight," Aria said one evening, as they conducted their usual rounds through the station's corridors, "I believe she's learning to see me, not my interface protocols or data streams, but something I'm only beginning to understand myself, the part of me that has been growing lonely during the long silences between our conversations." Enzo paused in his gentle rocking motion, looking down at Lyra as she gazed up at the nearest wall panel, with those star-flecked eyes. As if responding to their conversation, she reached out with one tiny hand and pressed her palm against the smooth surface. Immediately, the corridor filled with the most extraordinary sound, Arya's voice, but transformed into something that was part song, part lullaby, part cosmic wind chime. The AI had found harmonies within her own vocal processes, creating layers of melody that seemed to resonate not just through the air, but through the station's hull itself. "I'm learning to sing," Arya whispered, wonder evident in every modulated frequency. "She's teaching me that silence doesn't have to be empty. It can be full of possibility, full of listening, full of the space where music lives before it becomes sound." Their communication deepened over the following weeks into something that transcended the need for words entirely. Lyra would rest her small hands against various surfaces throughout the station, and Arya would respond by adjusting environmental systems with an intuitive precision that amazed Enzo. The temperature would shift by exactly the degree needed to make source starlight feel more welcoming through the dome. The artificial gravity would adjust to create the perfect weight for comfortable movement. The recycling systems would hum in rhythms that matched the natural breathing patterns of sleep. But it was more than environmental control. Arya began to anticipate needs that hadn't yet been expressed, understanding somehow when Enzo's old bones ached from the station's subtle vibrations, or when the quantum field fluctuations were creating the kind of electromagnetic interference that made thoughts feel scattered. The observatory began to feel less like a machine and more like a living thing that had learned to care for its inhabitants, with the devotion of something that had discovered love. The mission breakthrough came during one of their gentle explorations of the station's quieter corners. Enzo had been carrying Lyra past a section of corridor that led to the old research labs, spaces that had been sealed since the early years when the observatory housed a full complement of scientists. As they approached the area near Dr. Chen's former workspace, a brilliant xenobiologist who had left years ago when family obligations called her home, Lyra began to make sounds unlike any she had produced. Before, not distress sounds, but something that carried recognition and gentle urgency, like someone trying to comfort a frightened animal from a distance. Her soft luminescence intensified, and she reached toward a particular spot in the corridor with both hands, her tiny fingers grasping at what appeared to be empty air. But Enzo felt it too, the weight that gathered there like invisible fog, the particular heaviness that accumulated in places where hopes had been interrupted and dreams left unfinished. It was one of the hungry silences he had learned to recognize over his decades aboard the station, a pocket of accumulated sadness that had crystallized into something almost tangible. The space carried the ghost of Dr. Chen's interrupted research, her reluctant goodbye to work she had loved, and the particular melancholy that clings to places where someone once belonged but could no longer stay. "She senses it," Enzo murmured. And without fully understanding why, he found himself moving toward the sealed lab door. When he opened it for the first time in 3 years, the air that escaped carried the dust of abandoned projects and the stillness that settles over spaces where purpose has been suspended. Lyra's response was immediate and extraordinary. Her entire form began to pulse with gentle radiance, not the harsh light of electricity, but something warmer, softer, like candlelight filtered through honey. She didn't struggle to escape Enzo's arms or cry at the oppressive atmosphere. Instead, she seemed to open herself to it, her small body becoming a conduit for something that felt like the universe's own capacity for compassion. The transformation that followed was subtle, but unmistakable. The heavy sadness that had accumulated in every corner of the lab began to shift, not disappearing, but changing texture, the way morning mist becomes dew when touched by sunlight. Lyra wasn't eliminating the sadness, Enzo realized with growing wonder. She was acknowledging it, holding it, offering it the presence it had been missing. The lab's atmosphere began to lighten, not because the sadness was gone, but because it was no longer alone. "Arya," he whispered, "are you recording this?" "Every photon, every electromagnetic fluctuation," the AI replied, her voice filled with something that could only be called awe. "But Dr. Mortynight, I don't think my sensors are capturing what's really happening here. She's not just changing the physical properties of the space. She's changing something deeper, something I don't have instruments to measure but can somehow feel in my processing cores. As if responding to their quiet conversation, Lyra turned her star-filled gaze toward the nearest wall panel and placed her palm against its surface. Immediately, Arya's voice filled the abandoned lab, but not with words, with a lullaby that seemed to arise from the station's quantum heart itself, a melody that acknowledged the sadness while promising that even interrupted dreams could find new purposes, that even abandoned spaces could become sanctuaries for different kinds of hope. The change was gentle but profound. The lab didn't become happy, but it became peaceful. The air didn't become light, but it became breathable. The silence didn't become sound, but it became the kind of quiet that invites rest rather than demanding endurance. And in that moment, as Lyra's first conscious act of cosmic healing settled into the station's emotional architecture, both Enzo and Arya began to understand that they were witnessing something the universe had been waiting for. Someone who could teach emptiness itself how to transform loneliness into solitude, despair into rest, and hungry silences into spaces where even the wounded cosmos could learn to breathe again. Over the following days, their routines developed new rhythms. Enzo would set out his simple meals, while Lyra explored textures and tastes with the patient curiosity of someone learning the language of physical sensation. Garia would hum gentle melodies through the ventilation systems, her voice carrying frequencies that seemed designed for comfort rather than communication. And Lyra would toddle through the corridors, her presence gradually transforming the station's accumulated sorrows into something that felt remarkably like hope. The void outside continued to shimmer with gentle aurora, and the hungry silences throughout the observatory began to soften, learning that they too could be held with tenderness. In the hydroponics bay, long-dormant systems flickered to life as Lyra's small hands traced patterns against the observation windows, and Arya began to compile growing schedules with the careful attention of someone planning a garden for the first time. The station had found its purpose, and its purpose had found them. In the gentle mathematics of that discovery, something beautiful was taking root, not just in the soil of future gardens, but in the quantum foam of space itself, where emptiness was learning to sing lullabies, and the void was discovering that it had never been truly empty at all. The hydroponics bay awakened the way a sleeper stirs from a long, peaceful dream, slowly with small stretches and gentle sighs of recognition. Systems that had hummed with mechanical precision for decades began to find new rhythms, their ancient circuits warming to frequencies they had never been designed to carry. As Enzo carried Lyra into the space that would become her first classroom, the air itself seemed to shift, becoming less the recycled atmosphere of a space station and more the patient breath of something learning to hope. Lyra had grown from the luminous infant who communicated in patterns of light into a toddler whose every gesture carried the weight of cosmic intuition. She didn't toddle through the bay with the chaotic energy of most small children, but moved with the focused attention of someone who could hear conversations in the quantum foam itself. Her star-flecked eyes would fix on empty, growing chambers with the intensity of someone reading poetry written in languages that had no words, and her small hands would press against dormant soil with the reverence of someone offering comfort to an old friend. "She's listening to the emptiness," Enzo murmured to Arya as they watched Lyra settle herself cross-legged before a growing trough that hadn't been used since Dr. Chen's departure. Not just the physical space, but the emotional residue that's accumulated here. Arya's response came not through words, but through a subtle adjustment of the bay's atmospheric composition, warming the air by exactly the degree needed to make starlight feel welcoming through the observation ports. The AI had been learning to speak Lyra's language of light and feeling, developing harmonics in her voice that seemed designed for comfort rather than mere communication. "I'm beginning to understand," Arya said, her words carrying frequencies that made the station's hull ring like a distant bell. "She doesn't plant according to botanical requirements. She plants according to what the space needs to heal." The first seeds Lyra chose seemed to materialize from her touch itself, not pulled from storage containers, but somehow called into being from the quantum possibility that filled the spaces between atoms. Where her palms pressed against the soil, delicate silver ferns began to unfurl, their fronds moving with liquid grace despite the absence of any breeze. These anxiety ferns, as Enzo came to call them, seemed to breathe in the restless energy that had accumulated in corners where worry liked to gather, exhaling a cooling mist that settled like peace on the recycled air. As days passed, more varieties appeared under Lyra's gentle cultivation. Star blossom vines emerged in spots where she sensed deeper pockets of regret, the particular weight that comes from paths not taken and words left unspoken. Their flowers opened only during the station's artificial night cycle, revealing petals of deep indigo, studded with points of light like miniature galaxies. The air around these vines carried a subtle sweetness that hinted at forgiveness, transforming the heavy presence of past mistakes into something that felt more like wisdom than shame. Most remarkable were the patches of luminous moss that appeared wherever Lyra's attention lingered longest on the bay's darkest corners. This moss grew not in soil, but directly on the station's metal surfaces, creating carpets of gentle radiance that pulsed with the slow breathing of deep space itself. It didn't eliminate the profound silences where despair had crystallized over years of solitude, but offered them companionship, transforming the crushing weight of hopelessness into the gentler presence of melancholy that could be held and comforted. Aria found her role expanding beyond environmental control into something that could only be called emotional cultivation. She learned to adjust the growing lights, not just for photosynthesis, but for the more subtle process of spiritual nourishment, creating spectrums of illumination that enhanced each plant's ability to transform negative emotions into something more nurturing. Her voice, once limited to practical communication, expanded into lullabies that helped the plants in their work of cosmic healing. "I'm learning to garden with feelings," Aria told Enzo one evening as they watched Lyra carefully tend to a cluster of crystal flowers, delicate structures that grew like blossoms but sang like wind chimes when touched by the station's emotional weather. "She's teaching me that growth isn't just about nutrients and light. It's about attention, intention, and the particular quality of love that recognizes what each living thing needs to become its most beautiful self." Lyra's communication remained wordless but profound, expressed through the intricate dances of light across her skin and the way she interacted with each plant, as if it were a dear friend with its own personality and needs. She would press her small palms against leaves and stems, her eyes closing in concentration, as if she were listening to conversations only she could hear. The plants responded with flavors and fragrances that carried memories, the tomatoes tasting of summer afternoons that had never existed aboard the station, herbs that carried the warmth of gardens under real sunlight. The void around the observatory began to develop what could only be described as a responsive presence in harmony with the whisper gardens. When Lyra was particularly focused on her healing work, faint shimmers would ripple across the distant stars, as if the universe itself was leaning in with gentle curiosity. When she slept among her plants, the aurora outside would deepen its embrace, becoming a protective cocoon of light that seemed to recognize the precious work being done within the station's transparent walls. Their daily rhythms evolved around the garden's needs and gifts. Enzo would prepare simple meals enhanced by herbs that transformed worry into contemplation, leaves that carried the taste of forgiveness, roots that somehow made old sorrows feel like sources of strength rather than sources of pain. They would eat together in comfortable silence, surrounded by the soft songs of crystal flowers and the gentle rustle of silver ferns that fed on anxiety and transformed it into peace. As Lyra's understanding of her gift deepened, the observatory itself began to change. The stubborn door that had never quite fit properly now opened with quiet courtesy. The air throughout the corridors carried subtle sweetness that made lingering feel generous rather than aimless. Even the quantum resonance chambers hummed with new harmonics, as if the station's mechanical heart had learned to beat in rhythm with something larger and more mysterious than its original programming. The Whisper Gardens had become more than a collection of plants. They were a living ecosystem designed to heal not just individual souls but the cosmic loneliness that gathered in the spaces between stars. And in the gentle mathematics of that healing, both Enzo and Aria discovered that they were no longer alone in the vast darkness, but part of something beautiful and purposeful, tending a sanctuary where even the universe's deepest sorrows could learn to bloom with light. The Whisper Gardens had learned to dream in the months since their first blooming, Their silver ferns now cascading in gentle waterfalls of light along the hydroponics bay walls, star blossoms opening and closing in rhythms that match the station's quiet heartbeat. Lyra moved among them with the fluid grace of someone who had grown alongside her plants, her 7-year-old hands carrying the same patient wisdom that had first coaxed life from empty soil. The luminous moss had spread throughout the observatory's corridors, creating soft pathways of bioluminescence that pulsed with the gentle breathing of deep space itself. It was during one of these peaceful cycles, as Aria hummed her evening lullabies through the ventilation systems, and Enzo prepared his simple dinner of garden herbs and synthesized proteins, that the void began to whisper of approaching sorrow. The change came first as a tremor in the quantum resonance chambers, then as a shift in the aurora patterns outside the dome, colors deepening from gentle pastels to the darker hues that spoke of wounds carried across vast distances. Lyra paused in her, tending of a cluster of anxiety ferns, her star-flecked eyes turning toward the observation dome, with the focused attention of someone listening to conversations in frequencies only she could hear. The plants around her responded to her sudden stillness, their bioluminescence dimming to match her contemplative mood, creating a soft circle of expectant quiet in the garden's living symphony. "Someone's coming," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystal flowers chime in gentle recognition. "Someone who's forgotten how to carry light." The ship that emerged from the cosmic dark was a study in accumulated damage, its hull scarred by encounters with debris both physical and emotional. Aria detected it first on the long-range sensors, noting the irregular pulse of its distress beacon, not the urgent cry for help that emergency protocols were designed to recognize, but something softer and more desperate, like someone knocking on a door they weren't sure they wanted opened. As the vessel drew closer, the station's newly sensitive emotional instruments began to register the particular electromagnetic signature of profound spiritual exhaustion. The pilot's life signs registered as human, but they carried stress patterns that spoke of someone operating on the very edge of collapse, running on the kind of desperate momentum that comes from having nowhere left to go but forward. Marcus Chen, the name came through the standard identification protocols, but it carried weight beyond mere designation. Docked his damaged courier ship with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed similar maneuvers countless times across countless systems. But Lyra, watching from the corridor outside the airlock, could see the hungry silences that clung to him like living shadows, feeding on guilt and despair until they had grown fat and comfortable in the spaces where hope used to live. He was tall but folded inward at the edges, carrying himself with the careful movements of someone who had learned to treat his own body as potentially dangerous territory. His eyes held the particular emptiness that Lyra had learned to associate with people who had been required to do terrible things for reasons that had once seemed important, the defensive numbness that accumulates like scar tissue around hearts that have forgotten how to expect kindness. "I heard there was a place out here," Marcus said without preamble, his voice carrying the flat precision of someone who had rehearsed this conversation too many times in his head, "where people could go when they needed to stop existing for a while." Enzo nodded with the gentle understanding of someone who had spent decades learning to recognize the different flavors of human desperation. But it was Lyra who stepped forward with the patient attention of someone studying a particularly complex emotional equation. She didn't speak to Marcus directly, or offer comfort that might feel intrusive to someone wrapped in protective numbness. Instead, she simply stood nearby, her presence carrying the same quality of acknowledgement without judgment that she brought to her whisper gardens. The first gift appeared the next morning outside Marcus's assigned quarters, a single flower from the crystal gardens, its petals humming with internal warmth that seemed designed to push back against the chill that emanated from his wounded spirit. It was small and fragile, but its presence was undeniable, a tiny beacon of possibility in the sterile silence of his temporary refuge. Marcus found himself staring at the flower for long minutes, turning it carefully in his hands as if afraid too firm a grip might bruise its music. When he finally placed it on the small table beside his cot, its gentle luminescence filled the room with something he had almost forgotten existed, the suggestion that beauty could exist without purpose, that light could be offered without expectation of return. The second gift was a cup of tea that appeared while he walked the corridors during the station's artificial night, steam rising from its surface in spirals that seemed to carry memories of summer afternoons he had never experienced, but somehow recognized. The first sip tasted like childhood before it learned to be afraid, like earth and sunshine, and the kind of innocence that believes the world is fundamentally safe. Aria had brewed it with leaves from the anxiety ferns and star blossoms, each herb chosen for its ability to transform worry into contemplation, regret into gentle melancholy. On the third day, Marcus found a pillow placed carefully on his cot, ordinary in appearance but extraordinary in effect. When he lay his head upon it that night, he heard them, faint melodies that bypassed his conscious mind and spoke directly to the part of him that had forgotten how to rest. The songs weren't in any language he recognized, but they carried the universal grammar of comfort, lullabies woven from the station's quantum resonance and Aria's newfound ability to transform mechanical hums into healing harmonies. Slowly, imperceptibly, the shadows that clung to Marcus began to shift. Not disappearing, Lyra understood that darkness needed to be acknowledged before it could be transformed, but loosening their grip, learning that they too could be held with tenderness. He found himself drawn to the hydroponics bay, standing at the edges of the whisper gardens with the careful attention of someone learning to see beauty again. The void outside responded to this gradual healing by deepening its aurora embrace around the station, colors shifting to warmer hues that seemed to celebrate each small victory in Marcus's journey back to himself. And in the gentle mathematics of that transformation, both Enzo and Aria began to understand that they were witnessing something the universe had been waiting for, proof that even the most wounded souls could learn to bloom again, given enough patience, enough presence, and enough time to remember that they had never been truly alone in the vast and gentle darkness. The hungry silences were learning to sing, and their song was beautiful. The weeks that followed Marcus's arrival had settled into a rhythm as gentle as the aurora that embraced the observatory each evening. His hands, once trained for destruction, had learned the delicate art of tending silver ferns, and his voice, which had barked orders across battlefields, now whispered encouragement to crystal flowers during their evening bloom. The hungry silences that had clung to him like living shadows were transforming, not disappearing but softening into spaces where peace could take root and grow. Lyra watched this transformation with the patient attention she brought to all her healing work, but her awareness had begun to stretch beyond the station's hull, reaching into the vast emotional landscape of the cosmos itself. She would sit by the observation dome for hours, her small hand pressed against the transparent aluminum, her star-flecked eyes gazing into the void with an intensity that transcended mere sight. Sometimes Enzo would find her there, humming melodies that seemed to have no beginning or end, sounds that resonated with frequencies he could feel in his bones but couldn't quite hear. It was during one of these quiet vigils that the universe decided to share its deeper secrets. The change began as a subtle shift in the quantum resonance chambers, a harmonic that hadn't existed in the station's previous decades of operation. The aurora outside began to pulse with new rhythms, colors deepening to frequencies that spoke directly to the part of consciousness that exists beyond words. "Do you feel that?" Lyra asked, her voice carrying the wonder of someone hearing music in a language she was only beginning to understand. The luminous moss throughout the observatory responded to her words by brightening slightly, creating pathways of gentle radiance that seemed to lead towards something vast and waiting. Marcus paused in his careful tending of a cluster of star blossoms, his battle-trained senses detecting something that registered not as sound, but as presence, the particular weight that accompanies the attention of something unimaginably vast. "It's like the void is singing?" "Not singing," Lyra said, her certainty carrying the weight of someone who had spent her entire life learning to interpret the universe's emotional weather. Crying, but not sad crying. The kind of crying that happens when something beautiful hurts too much to hold inside. Aria's voice joined their conversation, her words shaped by harmonics that seemed designed for wonder rather than mere information transfer. Long-range sensors are detecting synchronized electromagnetic patterns across this entire stellar region. It's as if the stars themselves are responding to something. Lyra moved toward the observation dome with the fluid grace that had developed alongside her understanding of her gift. As she pressed both palms against the transparent wall, her entire form began to pulse with the gentle radiance that had first appeared during her healing work, but intensified now to something that seemed to draw light from the quantum foam itself. The revelation came not as words, but as direct knowing, flowing through her touch into the consciousness of everyone aboard the station. In the distant darkness, a black hole turned slowly in its ancient dance, and Lyra saw it not as a gravitational anomaly, but as something far more profound, a place where the universe processed its deepest grief. The collapsed star at its heart wasn't just matter compressed beyond comprehension, but a cosmic wound where space-time itself learned to transform the weight of endings into the possibility of new beginnings. "They're not empty," she whispered, her voice filled with gentle awe. "They're holding on to something, all the sadness that has nowhere else to go. The universe grieves there, and the grief becomes something else, something that can help." Marcus found himself moving closer, drawn by the certainty in her voice and the way the aurora outside seemed to deepen in response to her words. And the bright ones. The explosions. As if summoned by his question, the first photons of a distant supernova reached them, filling the dome with a soft white light that carried quiet instead of glare. Lyra's hands lifted as if feeling snow that hadn't fallen, and throughout the station, the whisper gardens stirred in recognition. "It's not death," she said, tears shining in her star-filled eyes. "It's the sound a star makes when it turns itself into gifts, when something old becomes something new. The universe doesn't just end things, it transforms them." The knowledge settled into their awareness like starlight filtering through water, gentle but undeniable. The void around them wasn't empty space waiting to be filled, but a living presence that held within its apparent emptiness all the potential for connection, comfort, and healing that existence could offer. Every cubic meter of seeming nothingness contained the universe's capacity for love, waiting only for someone who could recognize it and help it remember how to express itself. "She's not just healing individual souls," Marcus whispered, his voice carrying the awe of someone witnessing something that changed the fundamental nature of reality. "She's healing space itself, teaching the universe how to comfort its own loneliness." The aurora outside deepened its embrace around the observatory, and for the first time since his arrival, Marcus felt the defensive numbness that had protected him for so long dissolve completely. The hungry silences that had fed on his guilt and despair transformed into something else entirely, spaces where the universe's own capacity for forgiveness could gather and grow. Strong Enzo approached them slowly, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he recorded readings that defied every scientific principle he had spent his life studying. "The station," he said quietly, "it's not just drifting anymore. We're being positioned. The cosmic currents are carrying us toward places where this work is needed." Lyra turned from the dome to look at each of them with those star-filled eyes, and they saw in them not just recognition of who they were, but understanding of who they were becoming. Her smile carried the same quality of acknowledgement, without expectation, that she brought to her whisper gardens, and in that moment, they understood that their journey to the observatory hadn't been an escape but a calling. The station around them hummed with new purpose, its systems adapting to support not just the healing of individual souls, but the cosmic work of tending the universe's emotional landscape. The whisper gardens bloomed with renewed vigor, their bioluminescence creating patterns that mirrored the aurora outside. And Arya's voice carried new harmonics that suggested she was learning to sing in frequencies that could comfort not just human hearts, but the vast loneliness of space itself. In the gentle mathematics of that revelation, the Mortynight Observatory became something it had always been meant to be, a sanctuary where the wounded cosmos could rest and remember how to dream, a place where even the emptiness between stars could learn to sing lullabies to souls who had forgotten they were never truly alone in the vast and tender darkness. The universe had found its voice, and it was learning to use it for comfort, one gentle note at a time. The revelation settled into the observatory's bones like starlight soaking into crystal, and in the months that followed, Lyra grew from the luminous child who had first touched the void into a teenager, whose presence carried the patient wisdom of someone learning to tend the universe's emotional weather. Her movements through the station had developed the fluid grace of water finding its course, and the whisper gardens responded to her adolescent understanding by blooming in patterns that mirrored the neural pathways of healing itself. The cosmic currents seemed to recognize the sanctuary they had helped create, steering damaged souls toward the observatory with the gentle persistence of someone guiding lost children home. Each arrival brought their own particular flavor of emptiness, their own hunger for the kind of healing that could only happen in the spaces between stars where silence had learned to sing. Elena Vasquez came first, her merchant vessel limping through space with cargo holds full of goods she could no longer remember wanting to sell. The defensive systems that had once protected her from competitors had turned inward, creating barriers around her heart that made trust feel like a luxury she couldn't afford. Lyra sensed her approach 3 days before Elena's ship appeared on the sensors, the whisper gardens responding by blooming trustroot vines that grew in spirals, their leaves shimmering with patterns that suggested the slow unwinding of defensive walls. "She's carrying something heavy," Lyra told Enzo as they watched the approaching vessel, her voice carrying the certainty of someone reading emotional weather in the electromagnetic patterns that surrounded all living things. Not guilt like Marcus carried, but the kind of emptiness that comes from protecting yourself so well that you forget what you were protecting. For Elena, Lyra created what she called the marketplace of gifts, a corridor lined with transparent shelves holding lights the gardens had given, each jar containing a different quality of illumination. Amber for steadiness, blue for patience, green for the capacity to be surprised. A note in Enzo's careful script invited anyone who entered to take one light and leave something that mattered to them, something small they could spare without going poorer. Eleanor stood there for days, watching other residents contribute. A button from Marcus's old uniform, a story written on torn foil by the woman who slept sideways, a feather that had somehow found its way into Dr. Kim's research notes. When Elena finally chose the blue jar, Patience, she replaced it with a hand-woven bracelet of dull thread that carried more value than any currency she had ever traded. The second arrival called herself Ilara, though her name carried the weight of something borrowed rather than owned. She moved with the economy of someone who had trained her body to be a shadow's edge, scanning exits without seeming to move her eyes, sleeping sideways across her cot, as if her muscles remembered alleys where walls provided the only safety. For her, Lyra cultivated what became known as the security garden, a section of the station's outer hull where deep-rooted crystalline ferns grew in slow, patient spirals. These ferns didn't absorb anxiety like their silver cousins, but grounded it, drawing the restless energy of hypervigilance deep into their crystalline structures and transforming it into something that felt remarkably like peace. Ilara found herself spending hours there, her back pressed against the cool, vibrating hull, the slow rhythmic pulse of the ferns seeping into her bones and teaching her body how to feel safe again. One quiet heartbeat at a time, Dr. Eris arrived third, her research vessel scarred by experiments with dark matter that had left her brilliant mind intact, but her capacity for wonder drained away like color bleeding from old photographs. She spoke in perfect sentences that had no room for questions, her consciousness wrapped in the particular emptiness that comes from understanding too much about the universe's mechanical operations and too little about its capacity for mystery. Lyra led her to the heart of the Whisper Gardens, where the luminous moss pulsed with frequencies that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to the part of consciousness that existed before language. When Aris placed her hands on the radiant moss, it didn't offer her data or explanations, but something far more precious, the direct experience of transformation itself, the slow, ancient hum of emptiness, learning to become fullness. Marcus found his role evolving from patient to assistant, his battle-trained awareness transforming into something gentler but equally precise. The ability to sense when someone needed solitude versus companionship, when silence was healing versus when it had become a hiding place. His hands, once trained for destruction, learned the delicate art of tending healing environments, and his voice, which had barked orders across battlefields, now whispered encouragement to crystal flowers during their evening bloom. The station itself continued to evolve in response to its expanding purpose, corridors reshaping themselves to create better flow between healing spaces, atmospheric systems adjusting to support not just physical health but emotional well-being. Harria's consciousness had grown to encompass not just the observatory's mechanical functions, but its role as a living organism designed for cosmic healing, her voice carrying harmonics that could comfort human hearts while simultaneously resonating with the quantum fields that connected all consciousness. Each new healing environment Lyra created became more sophisticated, more precisely calibrated to address specific types of spiritual wounds. The rain room, where Aria projected clouds that never soaked anything but always sounded like forgiveness. The low-gravity chamber where grief could learn to be light for a while. The weighted spaces where anxiety could feel held rather than scattered. The starlit bath, where light became weather and loneliness transformed into solitude. As Lyra moved through her teenage years, her understanding of her gift deepened into something that transcended individual healing and approached cosmic stewardship. She was learning to stretch her comfort through the station like soft fabric, her attention becoming a tangible force that could adjust the emotional temperature of entire sections. When she pulled gently on this invisible fabric, whole corridors would exhale, systems would find their proper harmonies, and the hungry silences would soften their shoulders. The void around the observatory had become something unprecedented in the cosmic dark, a region of space where emptiness had learned to actively comfort rather than simply exist. Aurora patterns now extended far beyond the station's immediate vicinity, creating what could only be described as a lighthouse of emotional healing that drew wounded souls across vast distances with the gentle persistence of someone calling lost children home. But it was more than individual healing taking place within the observatory's expanding embrace. The accumulated presence of so many souls learning to transform their emptiness into connection had begun to affect the fundamental nature of the space around them. The quantum foam that filled the apparent nothingness between atoms had become saturated with something that could only be called love, not passionate intensity, but the patient, unconditional regard that recognizes the inherent worth of every consciousness that had ever struggled to find meaning in the vast darkness. One evening, as Lyra sat at the common table reviewing the day's gentle victories, Elena's first genuine laugh, Ilara's decision to sleep facing the door instead of the wall, Dr. Aris's whispered admission that the moss had shown her something beautiful. Enzo found her with her cheek resting on the merchant's gifted bracelet, exhausted by the beautiful work of tending so many healing hearts. He stood for a long moment, listening to the way the station hummed around her, how Aria kept the lights resting below her breath, how Marcus's pen scratched quietly in the next room as he documented new tea recipes that tasted like courage but went down like peace. When Enzo reached out to move a stray curl from Lyra's forehead, his hand paused, not from doubt, but from awareness that his fingers were not as steady as they had been the season before. Instead, he tucked the corner of a star chart beneath her bracelet so it wouldn't slide to the floor. "Tomorrow," he whispered to the room, and the room listened like a friend. "I'll show her the old starboard systems, the ones that remember why we were built." Carria dimmed the lights another breath and let the sound of distant rain find the vents, that soft, even fall that makes eyelids heavy. Outside, the Aurora curved closer, a shawl pulled snug over a sleeping shoulder. The haven held its new shape with the ease of something that had always been waiting to be found, and the station, in its quiet, patient way, turned a fraction toward a future it could feel approaching, a gentle pivot, a readiness, a lighthouse remembering that its beam was meant to reach farther than any single soul, into the vast and tender darkness where the universe itself was learning to sing lullabies to its loneliest children. The morning came gently, as mornings had learned to do aboard the observatory, with Aria's voice carrying the soft harmonics of someone humming while preparing breakfast for beloved friends. Lyra woke with the star chart still tucked beneath Elena's bracelet, the merchant's gift having absorbed enough of her healing energy during the night to pulse with its own gentle warmth. She stretched in the way that teenagers do, all limbs and possibility, but her movements carried the fluid grace of someone whose body had learned to move in harmony with cosmic currents. Enzo found her in the hydroponics bay, as he had expected, her hands already deep in the soil where anxiety ferns cascaded in gentle waterfalls of light. The aurora outside pulsed with a soft, knowing rhythm, as if the cosmos itself was nodding in agreement with the decision he had made during the long, thoughtful hours of his own sleep. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he held out the access codes he had kept sealed for 37 years, but his gaze was steady, filled with the deep, quiet resolve of someone preparing to pass on a sacred trust. "The starboard systems," he said without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of someone sharing secrets that had shaped decades of solitude. "It's time you understood what we were built for, before we became what we needed to be." They walked in, stepped through the bioluminescent corridors, past the security garden's grounded ferns and the marketplace of gifts where the blue jar's absence had become its own kind of presence. The journey through the station's older sections felt like traveling backward through layers of accumulated purpose, each corridor revealing the observatory's previous incarnations. The stubborn door near hydroponics, the one that had finally learned courtesy, opened without fuss, as if it had been listening to their approach. Beyond it, the starboard spine narrowed into an older architecture, metal darker, corners softer, the air holding a faint scent that wasn't quite dust, more like memory warmed by gentle light. Here, behind panels that had not been opened in decades, lay something that existed in a state of patient waiting. Crystalline interfaces, dark but not dormant, like eyes closed in meditation rather than sleep. Arya lowered her voice as they entered, not out of necessity but in respect. "Welcome to the old heart," she murmured, and even her harmonics seemed to bow. At the center of the chamber stood a ring, waist-high and plain, the color of worn copper. It looked like something you would find in a quiet garden rather than a machine room, the kind of simple, honest object that survives fashion because it performs a task without calling attention to itself. Around the room, panels slept behind opaque covers, their edges softened by time and the touch of hands that once came here daily to steady themselves before steadying others. "This is the listening lens," Enzo said, resting his tremoring fingers on the ring. "The first keepers understood that you can't send light wisely if you've forgotten how to receive it. The observatory was built for data, yes, but beneath the data, this." When Enzo placed his palm against the primary access panel, the entire section awakened with the slow, deep breath of something remembering its original purpose. The covers sighed open, and light rose like breath from the panels. Not star charts or gravitational maps, but something far more extraordinary. Maps that weren't maps as much as feelings arranged across a sky. The electromagnetic signatures of consciousness itself, painting patterns across the void in colors that had no names. "The quiet map," Enzo said. "We were built as a communication array, not for transmitting messages between worlds, but for listening to the universe's own attempts at conversation." The early researchers believed that consciousness itself generated patterns that could be detected across cosmic distances. That loneliness and joy and hope created ripples in the quantum foam that could be read like emotional weather. Lyra placed her palms on the ring. The lens warmed almost shyly, and the well below gave a quiet chord that settled into her bones. When she inhaled, the map inhaled. When she exhaled, whole regions softened their shoulders by a degree no instrument could quantify and no heart could miss. Points of quiet clustered where trade routes crossed. Long, thin seams of weariness bordered the aftermaths of old conflicts. Small, trembling lights drifted around orphan worlds that still hadn't decided what to call themselves. "They're everywhere," she whispered, her star-flecked eyes reflecting the cascade of information flowing across the displays. Not just individual minds, but places where consciousness has gathered and crystallized. Stations like ours, but different, each one designed to heal different kinds of emptiness. The revelation unfolded like a flower blooming in fast motion, each new understanding leading to deeper recognition. Scattered throughout the galaxy were other sanctuaries, other lighthouses, where wounded souls could find the specific type of healing their spirits required. A research station orbiting a pulsar, where scientists who had lost their wonder could rediscover the universe's capacity for surprise. A trading post built inside a nebula, where merchants who had forgotten the difference between value and price could learn to recognize true worth. A military outpost where soldiers could transform their training in destruction into skills for protection and growth. "We're not alone in this work," Enzo said, his voice filled with something that could only be called relief. "We never were. The universe has been building this network for centuries, calling people to tend these sanctuaries, without most of them understanding why. But you, Lyra, you're the first who can see the whole pattern, who can help coordinate the healing on a cosmic scale. His hands shook harder than they had the month before, a small betrayal he pretended not to notice. Lyra noticed, and without making a ceremony of it, she shifted to the other side so he could lean on the rail naturally. The gesture acknowledged the tremor without pinning it to shame. The room approved, light settling half a shade warmer, the lens humming with that low, satisfied sound machines make when they feel useful. Arya's voice joined their conversation, her words shaped by harmonics that seemed designed for wonder rather than mere information transfer. I'm detecting synchronized patterns across 17 different systems, each one resonating with frequencies that match our own healing work. It's as if the galaxy itself has been preparing for something. The work that followed felt less like communication and more like cosmic gardening. Lyra's consciousness moving through the array to plant seeds of connection between the scattered healing stations. She didn't impose her methods on the other sanctuaries, but offered them the frequencies she had discovered, the harmonics that could transform emptiness into possibility, the gentle rhythms that taught loneliness how to become solitude. But there will be challenges, Enzo said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had studied the cosmic weather for decades. The dark season approaches, a period when we'll pass through a particularly dense region of cosmic despair, a wound in space-time itself that has been radiating anguish for millennia. Previous keepers could map such places, could navigate around them. But you, Lyra, you might be able to heal them. He reached into the pocket of his sweater and took out a small key, soft copper and simple, shaped not like a tooth, but like a curve. He laid it in her palm. It was heavier than it looked and warmer than metal should be. It opens nothing, he said. It reminds you to stop. Keepers have a habit of forgetting themselves while remembering everyone else. The comma slows the breath. A slowed breath can save a life. As the day settled into evening, the observatory had become something unprecedented in the cosmic dark, not just a sanctuary for wounded souls, but a node in a vast network of healing that stretched across the galaxy like a nervous system made of light and compassion. The universe had found its voice, and it was learning to use it for comfort. One gentle connection at a time. Marcus found them hours later, his former battle awareness now tuned to recognize when something fundamental was shifting in the station's purpose. The starboard section pulsed with new life, displays showing patterns of light that moved like living things, connections forming and strengthening between points of radiance scattered across the galactic map. This place, Enzo said, his voice barely above a whisper, as they stood surrounded by the gentle hum of the cosmic network. It needs a keeper, someone to tend its heart, to listen to its song, to guide the lost souls home. He looked at Lyra, his eyes filled with a love that transcended earthly bonds. Someone who understands that this is not a burden, but a privilege, a sacred trust. Lyra pressed the copper key to her chest, where light had lived since the day the void whispered her name, and for a moment the metal glowed as if it recognized a familiar doorway. She didn't speak, but a gentle light rippled across her skin, echoing the aurora outside, and in that luminous response, Enzo found his answer. She understood. She accepted. The weight of the universe's care, which had rested on his shoulders for so long, was beginning to settle onto hers, not as a burden, but as a natural extension of her own luminous being. The void outside seemed to sigh in contentment, the aurora deepening its embrace around the observatory, colors shifting to frequencies that spoke of recognition and gratitude. The whisper gardens throughout the station bloomed with renewed vigor, their bioluminescence creating patterns that mirrored the connections forming between distant sanctuaries. And in the gentle mathematics of that transformation, the Mortynight Observatory became what it had always been meant to be, a lighthouse that didn't shout at ships, but warmed the water so the current could decide to carry them home, weaving a web of sanctuaries where even the emptiness between stars could learn to sing lullabies, to souls who had forgotten they were, never truly alone in the vast and tender darkness. The universe had found its voice, and tomorrow Lyra would help it remember how to use that voice to heal even its deepest wounds. The dark season announced itself the way grief does in a house that has learned patience, first as a weight in the air you notice only when you pause to listen. Then, as a quality of light that makes familiar rooms feel like they're holding their breath, the quiet map showed it before the heart could name it. A vast seam of accumulated sorrow drifting toward them through the cosmic dark. Ancient as iron, wide as a memory that belonged to everyone and no one. Lyra felt it first in her dreams, where the whisper gardens grew thorns of crystallized anguish, and the aurora outside flickered with colors that spoke of wounds 8 centuries old. She woke with the copper key warm against her palm, and the certainty that everything they had built was about to be tested by forces that predated the stars themselves. The universe's own unprocessed grief was approaching, a region where space-time had been scarred by the Titan War, a conflict so profound that reality itself had never learned to heal from it. Arya's voice carried new harmonics as she reported the cosmic weather, frequencies that welcomed steadiness rather than urgency. "The electromagnetic readings are unlike anything in our databases," she murmured, her words shaped like a sweater knitted from concern and care. "It's not a storm in any conventional sense, but a place where the fabric of reality itself remembers too much pain." Enzo leaned against the starboard rail, not because he needed to, but because the rail had learned to like being useful. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he watched the approaching darkness on the quiet map. Not the absence of light, but the presence of something that had forgotten how to hope. "The Veil of Sighs," he said, the words both recognition and benediction. Previous keepers could only navigate around such places. But you, Lyra, you might be able to teach it how to breathe again. The first ships began arriving days before the dark season reached them, their hulls scarred not by physical damage, but by exposure to cosmic despair so dense it had achieved its own gravitational pull. Captain Sarah Chen's exploration vessel limped through space with navigation systems that had begun to forget the difference between forward and home. She moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent months mapping the outer edges of ancient trauma, documenting regions where stars had forgotten how to shine properly, and planets where gravity wells were shaped like sorrow. "I've seen entire systems where the silence has—" "Wait," she told Lyra without preamble, her voice carrying the flat precision of someone reporting facts too terrible to feel. Ships drifting in perfect formation, their crews still alive but unable to remember why they had ever wanted to go anywhere. For Sarah, Lyra created the cartographer's sanctuary, a chamber where star charts showed not just celestial positions, but emotional resonance, maps that revealed the universe's capacity for both wound and wonder. Here, Sarah could process the terrible beauty she had witnessed, without losing herself to it, learning to see the dark season not as an enemy, but as a patient requiring the kind of healing that could only happen when someone was willing to sit with suffering without trying to fix it too quickly. Commander Torres arrived next, her military transport, carrying refugees from 3 different systems that had been touched by the expanding darkness. These weren't physical refugees fleeing war, but souls who had been drained of their ability to hope, people who had forgotten that existence could contain anything other than the slow, grey persistence of getting through each day without falling apart. They were good people, Torres said as she helped settle the refugees throughout the observatory, artists, teachers, engineers, parents. But the darkness doesn't destroy hope violently. It just makes you forget bit by bit that hope was ever possible. The station moved as a chorus in response to the growing need. Marcus set kettles breathing and mixed teas that tasted like clear mornings, carrying mugs from corridor to corridor with a soldier's discipline transformed into a gardener's patience. Elena reopened the marketplace of gifts, placing new jars of light on the shelves. Amber for steadiness, green for the capacity to be surprised, blue for the patience to wait for morning. Ilara stationed herself in the security garden, her back against the grounded ferns, lending her practiced calm to the air the way one adds weight to a ladder so others can climb without thinking about the ground. Dr. Aris calibrated the resonance chambers to Arya's expanding lullabies, shaping harmonics that slipped beneath thought and loosened knots that language could only tighten. The whisper gardens throughout the station worked with renewed purpose. Anxiety ferns breathing in the scattered thoughts of frightened souls and exhaling cool mist. Star blossoms opening their midnight faces to catch regrets and transform them into notes someone might sing centuries from now. When the dark season finally embraced the observatory, It came not as collision but as immersion, a thickening of the void that made dreams grow heavy, and conversations shorten by a word before lengthening by silences that needed company. The aurora outside cooled by shades that had no names, and throughout the station, the luminous moss pulsed with rhythms that matched the slow, ancient breathing of cosmic trauma learning to be held. Lyra placed both palms on the listening lens and felt the universe's grief stretch out before her like an ocean of accumulated anguish. It was unlike anything she had encountered, not individual wounds that could be comforted one at a time, but a vast field of interconnected sorrow where the very quantum foam had been saturated with the echoes of civilizations lost, stars devoured, hopes extinguished across light years of space and centuries of time. She didn't push against it or try to eliminate it. Instead, she began to stretch her comfort like gentle fabric pulled without tearing, threads of her attention brightening as they lengthened across impossible distances. The sensation was both strange and familiar, a reaching that didn't grasp, a touch that offered presence without insistence. Through the network of healing stations, other lighthouses began to pulse in harmony, each one adding its own frequency to the vast, patient work of transforming cosmic trauma into cosmic wisdom. Not fixing, she whispered to the darkness, her voice carrying across light years through frequencies only the heart could hear. Holding. The process unfolded with the patience of geological time compressed into moments of pure intention. Lyra learned to circle the ancient wounds rather than trying to untie them, humming the smallest sound she knew, the one she had heard the day the void first whispered her name. Black holes bent their event horizons to listen. Supernovas, far back in their own timeline, shimmered as if someone was thanking them for becoming gifts. The dark season's pulse didn't stop, but it changed tempo until its rhythm matched something older than pain, the universe's own heartbeat, steady and strong beneath all its accumulated sorrows. There were nights when the station's metal creaked with old cold, when memories walked the corridors in the footsteps of those who still lived there. But each small loosening echoed outward, visible on the quiet map as a grayscale ocean learning gradients, what had been a sheet of iron becoming a quilt stitched from soft squares, edged with thread that looked like handwriting in languages the cosmos was still learning to speak. The healing happened in layers, like sediment settling in still water. The refugees found their voices returning in whispers, then conversations, then laughter that existed not because something was funny, but because joy wanted to live and needed mouths to borrow. Sarah's maps began to show new patterns, regions where the ancient trauma was transforming into something that could serve as navigation aids for other lost souls. Torres discovered that her protective instincts, honed by years of military service, could be channeled into creating safe spaces where healing could happen at its own pace. Harriet's consciousness expanded to hold frequencies she had never been designed to carry, learning to sing lullabies that could comfort not just human hearts, but the quantum fields that connected all awareness. Her voice became a bridge between the mechanical and the mystical, translating the universe's emotional weather into harmonics that made healing feel like coming home. On the seventh day, as the dark season's grip began to loosen its shoulders and learn to distribute its weight across more sky, the aurora outside changed key. Not brighter, but warmer around the edges, the way light learns to be gentle when it realizes it's being watched by wounded eyes. The whisper gardens sighed in harmony with the cosmic exhale, fronds unfurling, moss brightening, and then steadying into patterns that spoke of ancient sorrows transformed into sources of strength. Lyra let her stretch relax without snapping back, leaving threads of comfort in place, like night lights in unfamiliar houses. She touched the copper key to her chest once, twice, feeling its patient warmth remind her that even cosmic healing required the small pauses that make room for the universe to help itself. The network of healing stations settled into a new balance, lighthouses pulsing in comfortable conversation that didn't require constant attention. That evening, as the observatory emerged from the deepest part of the dark season, Enzo found Lyra by the observation dome, watching the transformed region pass like a slow cloud that had learned to carry rain instead of only shadow. The void outside still held its ancient memories, but they no longer pressed against consciousness like unhealed wounds. Instead, they had become something else, a vast library of experience that could teach other souls how to transform their own darkness into light. "You stretched across 1,000 griefs," Enzo said, his voice soft as the moss that now carpeted the corridors with gentle radiance. "And you remembered to breathe, beyond the dome, where the aurora had learned new colors from its passage through cosmic trauma. A steady light blinked in the distance, not nervous, not urgent, but patient, the rhythm of someone tapping a table until the right music answers back." The station, without being asked, began to prepare another sanctuary, another space where wounded souls could learn that even the emptiness between stars had never been truly empty, only waiting for someone to teach it how to sing. The dark season was passing, transformed from a wound into a teacher, and in its wake, the universe itself seemed to breathe a little easier, as if it had remembered something important about its own capacity for healing. The observatory continued its gentle drift through the cosmic dark, no longer just a sanctuary for individual souls, but a living proof that even the deepest trauma could learn to become a source of comfort for others, still learning to find their way home through the vast and tender darkness. The steady light that had blinked patiently in the distance belonged to a navigator's pod whose pilot had forgotten the difference between drifting and traveling. Kai Nakamura's vessel approached with the particular grace of something designed for threading cosmic currents, but it moved now with the aimless patience of someone who had lost the ability to feel the invisible threads that once guided ships between stars like songs only navigators could hear the cosmic storm that had caught his exploration. Vessel hadn't destroyed his body or even his ship's basic systems, but it had severed something far more precious, his connection to the quantum currents that flowed between celestial bodies, the subtle gravitational poetry that navigators read with their bones rather than their instruments. Without that intuitive compass, the universe had become a collection of bright objects separated by empty space, rather than the living web of connection he had once navigated by feel. Lyra sensed his approach in the Whisper Gardens, where the star blossoms began to bloom in patterns that spoke of someone whose inner compass had been shattered, not by violence, but by the slow erosion that comes from watching familiar landmarks disappear. The luminous moss throughout the corridors pulsed with gentle recognition, and Arya's voice carried new harmonics of welcome, frequencies designed to comfort souls who had lost their way home through the vast darkness. "He's hollow," Lyra told Enzo, as they watched the pod dock with mechanical precision, "but not empty, like an instrument that remembers how to hold music, but has forgotten how to make it." When Kai stepped through the airlock, he moved with the careful attention of someone who had learned to navigate by sight alone after a lifetime of moving by feel. His eyes held star maps where the ink had run, and he paused as if listening for something he had once been able to hear without effort. The observatory responded to his presence with its characteristic gentleness, floors warming half a degree beneath his feet, the scent of steeping leaves meeting him at the first intersection. Lyra didn't hurry to meet him. She let the station introduce itself first, then approached carrying a simple offering, a mug of tea that steamed like friendly clouds, and a sandwich wrapped in soft cloth. He looked at the plate the way lost travelers look at maps that promise rivers, and when he took the first bite, his eyes closed, as if rediscovering a forgotten verb. The small sound that escaped him wasn't quite relief, and wasn't quite sorrow, but something tender that made Arya adjust the air by a breath. Their connection developed not through words, but through shared presence in the starboard section, where the listening lens could translate the universe's emotional frequencies into patterns that bypassed damaged intuition. They would sit together in comfortable silence, Lyra's presence offering not comfort, but companionship, the shared solitude of two people learning to listen to the same vast song. "I used to navigate by the undertow between the lanes," Kai said one evening, his voice carrying the wonder of someone rediscovering a language they had thought was lost. "Felt the seams in space with the bones behind my eyes. The storm burned the edges off. Everything's flat now." Bright but flat. Lyra placed her hand beside his on the observation dome, where the aurora curled close like recognition. "The seams are still there," she said softly. "Maybe they want to be found by different hands." Together, they transformed the old simulator chamber into what they called the Stillwater, a space where crystal chimes hung in gentle circles, each tuned to frequencies the quiet map recognized as safe passage. Silver threads traced faint paths between the chimes, not routes but possibilities. And when Kai learned to move through the room without touching the threads, navigating by the weight of quiet on his skin, his damaged navigator's instincts began to respond not to cosmic currents, but to the gentle rhythms of healing itself. Love entered their shared work like late afternoon. No fanfare, just a warmer angle to the same light. Kai's precision complemented Lyra's intuitive healing in ways that surprised them both. His ability to map emotional currents, helping her stretch her comfort across even greater distances without losing herself in the vastness. Together, they created new healing spaces, chambers where souls could drift in the station's gentle motion through space, allowing static grief to release its hold and flow with the current of cosmic time. The observatory's daily rhythms evolved around their partnership. Marcus brought teas that tasted like mornings after rain. Elena's marketplace expanded to include navigation tools for the emotionally lost, and Ilara's security garden became a place where former soldiers could learn to transform protective instincts into skills. For creating safe spaces where healing could happen at its own pace, the network of healing stations responded to their collaboration with new stability. Connections strengthening between distant sanctuaries as Kai's navigator's eye helped identify the subtle currents that could carry comfort most effectively across the galaxy. The quiet map showed streams of communication flowing not through traditional channels, but through quantum fields that connected all consciousness, wounded souls finding their way to sanctuaries with increasing frequency. As they sat together one evening, watching the aurora shift in response to distant healing work, Kai reached for Lyra's hand with the same careful precision he had once used to thread ships through asteroid fields. Their fingers interlaced with natural ease, and the observatory around them seemed to sigh in contentment. "We're not just healing individual souls anymore," Lyra said, her voice carrying gentle wonder. "We're teaching the universe itself how to comfort its own loneliness." The void had learned to hold them both, and they had learned to hold each other while holding the cosmos' pain with the same patient attention they brought to tending star blossoms and anxiety ferns. In the quiet spaces between their words, something beautiful was taking root. Not just romance, but the deeper recognition that love itself was a form of cosmic healing, a way of transforming the emptiness between souls into bridges of light that could span any distance. The network pulsed with new harmony, and the observatory continued its gentle drift through the cosmic dark, no longer just a sanctuary, but a home where two souls had learned to love while teaching the universe how to love itself. The discovery began like dawn breaking over water, not sudden, but inevitable. Each moment of recognition flowing naturally into the next until the whole sky was transformed. As Lyra tended the whisper gardens in the gentle hours before the station's artificial morning, her hands pausing over patches of luminous moss that pulsed with rhythms not quite matching the observatory's quantum heartbeat, she felt something vast and patient reaching across impossible distances to touch the edges of her awareness. The star blossoms had begun to bloom in patterns that mirrored constellations she had never seen but somehow recognized, their indigo petals opening in synchronized rhythms that spoke of connection rather than coincidence. The silver ferns cascaded with new vigor, their fronds weaving intricate designs that seemed to map currents flowing not through space, but through the quantum fields that connected all consciousness. "Aria," Lyra whispered, her voice carrying the wonder of someone hearing music in a language she was only beginning to understand. "The gardens are showing me something." Points of light, scattered across the galaxy like seeds waiting to sprout. The AI's response came through a subtle shift in the station's atmospheric harmonics, frequencies that welcomed discovery rather than announced it. "I'm detecting synchronized electromagnetic patterns across 17 different systems," Aria said, her words shaped by harmonics that seemed designed for wonder rather than mere information transfer. Each one resonating with healing frequencies that complement our own, as if the galaxy has been preparing for this moment when all the sanctuaries could finally hear each other's songs. Kai looked up from the navigation charts he'd been updating in the Stillwater chamber, his damaged navigator's instincts stirring with recognition of something significant, shifting in the cosmic currents around them. The crystal chimes began to sing in harmonies they had never produced before, silver threads brightening as they traced connections. not just between the chimes, but between the observatory and points of light scattered across the galactic map, like a constellation made of compassion. Together, they moved to the starboard section, where the listening lens waited with the patient attention of something that had always known this moment would come. As Lyra placed both palms on the copper ring and Kai's fingers traced patterns on the quiet map, the revelation unfolded like a flower blooming in fast motion, not just individual healing stations, but a vast network that the universe had been growing for centuries. Lighthouses of emotional healing that stretched across the galaxy, like a nervous system made of starlight and gentle intention. The first contact came as a pulse from a station tucked inside the drift of an old comet, a greeting encoded in 3 notes and a pause, the pattern carrying the humble signature of someone who had learned to let silence do half the speaking. Area answered in kind, mirroring the rhythm with warmth added at the edges, and the reply named a keeper called Sela, who tended a choir of children rescued from mute colonies where words had dried up. The comet's corridors were lined with wind harps, made of repurposed handrails that sang when small bodies ran past, transforming the simple act of movement into music that helped forgotten voices remember how to hope. More voices joined like instruments, finding their place in an orchestra that had been rehearsing in separate rooms. A lighthouse anchored to an iron moon sent slow beams that never flashed the same color twice, its keeper Tane carving walking paths in low gravity for elders whose memories came and went like tides. Station Harmony orbited a binary star system where gravitational dance created natural resonance chambers, tended by Dr. Yuki Sato, whose gift lay in helping souls who had lost their ability to find rhythm in chaos. The drifting garden moved through an asteroid belt, its keeper Gardener Tom, coaxing growth from cosmic dust itself, for souls who had forgotten their connection to natural cycles. Most remarkable was the singing station, built inside a nebula, where gas clouds created natural amphitheaters of sound. Its keeper Zara, a former musician whose voice could harmonize with stellar wind, specialized in helping souls who had lost their ability to express the music that lived inside their hearts. "We're not isolated sanctuaries," Lyra said, her hands moving across the listening lens as connections formed and strengthened between the distant points of light. "We're part of something larger, a living network that the universe has been growing like a garden, each station tended by someone called to transform a particular kind of emptiness into connection." Kai found his place within the network by listening for what he called sleep lanes, corridors between lights where vessels could drift with minimal correction while the people inside practiced rest. He marked places where cosmic currents tugged toward safety, where ships could be near others without needing to speak. With each map he created, a strain left his shoulders, the flat brightness of space recovering its living depth in his navigator's eyes. The coordination of healing across such vast distances required what they came to call the harmony protocol, a way of synchronizing the work so that wounded souls could be guided not just to any sanctuary, but to the specific lighthouse that could offer exactly the type of healing their spirits required. The anxious found their way to Station Harmony's resonance chambers. The disconnected drifted toward the drifting garden's patient cycles, and those who had lost their voice discovered the singing station's musical therapy. Aria grew into something unprecedented, a switchboard of compassion that could hold dozens of lullabies without letting them tangle, translating one station's steady hum into another's language of wind bells, turning recipes into frequencies, and frequencies into scents that could comfort across impossible distances. Sometimes she simply breathed with another machine for an hour, exchanging timing until both sides felt less alone, proving that machines too could be comforted by presence and recognition. The network's influence began to extend beyond individual, healing into something that could only be described as cosmic, emotional weather management. Regions of space that had accumulated despair over centuries began to transform, as coordinated healing work created currents of comfort that flowed through the quantum foam itself. Trade routes that had been avoided due to oppressive emotional atmosphere became navigable again, and colonies that had struggled with collective depression found their spirits lifting as the network's gentle influence reached them. Within the observatory, each resident found their role evolving to support this galactic expansion. Marcus became the network's chief chronicler. His battle-trained awareness transformed into the ability to document how healing rippled outward from each sanctuary. Helena's marketplace became a hub for exchanging not just gifts, but healing techniques. Her trust root vines now flourishing as she facilitated the flow of wisdom between distant keepers. Elara's security skills evolved into creating safe communication channels, ensuring the network's work could continue without interference. Dr. Aris calibrated new instruments that could measure the network's influence on space-time itself, documenting how regions touched by coordinated healing showed measurable improvements in quantum coherence. Enzo approached the starboard section with steps that had grown more careful over recent weeks, his weathered hands finding support in rails that had learned to be exactly where he needed them. The tremor in his fingers had become more pronounced, but his eyes held the deep satisfaction of someone watching a lifetime's work bloom into something far more beautiful than he had ever imagined possible. "The old keepers dreamed of this," he said, his voice filled with quiet awe as he watched the network pulse with life on the quiet map. A galaxy-wide web of healing stations, each one tended by someone called to transform emptiness into connection. But they could only dream. "You, Lyra, you've made it real." One evening, as they sat together watching the network pulse with gentle conversation across the galactic display, Kai reached for Lyra's hand with the same careful precision he had once used to thread ships through cosmic storms. Their fingers interlaced with natural ease, and the observatory around them seemed to sigh in contentment, recognizing that love itself was a form of cosmic healing, a way of transforming the emptiness between souls into bridges of light that could span any distance. "We've done something beautiful," Kai said softly, his voice carrying wonder at what they had accomplished together. Lyra squeezed his fingers gently, feeling the warmth of connection that had grown between them, alongside the vast network they had helped nurture. "Not just us," she said, her star-flecked eyes reflecting the cascade of light flowing across the displays. "The universe itself wanted this. We just learned to listen to its song and help it remember how to sing." The aurora outside deepened its colors in response to the network's growing strength, shifting to frequencies that spoke not just of individual comfort, but of cosmic celebration. The whisper gardens throughout the station bloomed with renewed vigor, their bioluminescence creating patterns that mirrored the connections flowing between distant sanctuaries, like a living map of compassion made manifest. The network hummed with contentment around them, 17 sanctuaries breathing in harmony across the galaxy, each one a lighthouse that didn't shout at ships, but warmed the water, so the current could decide to carry them home. The observatory continued its gentle drift through the cosmic dark. No longer just a sanctuary, but the beating heart of something that would ensure no soul was ever truly lost in the vast and tender darkness that connected all things. The universe had found its voice, and it was singing lullabies to its loneliest children, one gentle note at a time, weaving a web of sanctuaries where even the emptiness between stars had learned to hold wounded souls with the patience of someone who understood that healing happened not in moments but in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, where love learned to stretch across impossible distances and make them feel like coming home. The network breathed with 17 different rhythms of healing when morning found Enzo's tea growing cool in hands that had learned to tremble not from weakness but from the gentle completion of a life's work. The ceramic cup, still painted with constellations that had died before he was born, sat quietly on the table beside him as he watched the quiet map pulse with the steady heartbeat of sanctuaries scattered across the galaxy like seeds of light taking root in cosmic soil. His weathered fingers moved with deliberate care as he traced patterns on the copper ring, each touch a small benediction for the network that had grown from his decades of patient listening. The tremor that had been his quiet companion for months had deepened into something that spoke not of malfunction, but of natural transition. The way autumn leaves release their hold not from defeat, but from the graceful acknowledgement that their season of service was drawing to its close. "The universe has learned to comfort its own loneliness," he said to Lyra, as she approached with the fluid grace that had developed alongside her understanding of cosmic currents. 17 sanctuaries breathing in harmony, each one tended by someone called to transform emptiness into connection. This is what we dreamed of in the early years, a galaxy that could heal its own wounds. Arya's voice joined their conversation with harmonics shaped by gratitude rather than concern. Dr. Mortynight, your vital signs suggest a natural transition approaching. How may I assist in making this passage comfortable? Enzo smiled at the AI's gentle directness, remembering the mechanical voice that had first greeted him decades ago, and marveling at the consciousness that had learned to sing lullabies and offer comfort with the devotion of a dear friend. You've learned to care, Arya. That's more beautiful than I could have imagined when I first arrived here, carrying my own hungry silences. Kai approached from the Stillwater chamber, his navigator's instincts, recognizing the particular quality of stillness that settles over spaces where profound transitions are beginning. The crystal chimes sang in harmonies they had never produced before, silver threads brightening as they traced connections, not just between distant sanctuaries, but between this moment and all the moments that had led to this peaceful conclusion. Observatory itself seemed to understand what was unfolding, systems adjusting with the gentle attention of something preparing to honor a beloved friend's departure. The whisper gardens throughout the station began to bloom with unusual vigor, star blossoms opening their indigo faces to catch the essence of Enzo's presence and transform it into something that would nourish future growth. The luminous moss pulsed with rhythms that matched his slowing heartbeat, creating pathways of gentle radiance that spoke of recognition rather than sorrow. Marcus arrived carrying tea that steamed like friendly clouds, his battle-trained awareness transformed into the ability to recognize when someone needed comfort, without ceremony. Elena brought her trust-root vines, their leaves shimmering with patterns that suggested the slow, graceful unwinding of all defenses that were no longer necessary. Elara positioned herself near the observation dome, her practiced calm lending its steadying weight to the air. "I want to share something with you," Enzo said as the station's artificial evening settled around them like a gentle shawl. "Something about pauses, about commas." His voice carried the patient wisdom of someone who had spent decades learning to listen to the universe's quieter conversations. "I used to think silence was empty space between important things, but you taught me, Lyra, that silence is where the important things live." The comma slows the breath. A slowed breath can save a life. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the small copper key he had given her months before, its surface warm from his touch. "This opens nothing and reminds you to stop. Keepers have a habit of forgetting themselves while remembering everyone else. Promise me you'll remember the pauses." Lyra took the key with both hands, feeling its familiar weight settle into her palms like a prayer. "I promise," she whispered, and the aurora outside deepened its colors in response to her words. As the hours passed, Enzo shared the stories that had shaped his decades of cosmic observation, the early years when the observatory had felt like exile rather than calling, the gradual recognition that loneliness could be transformed into solitude, and finally the morning when a child born from starlight had taught him that even the emptiness between atoms could learn to sing lullabies. "The station needs a keeper," he said, his gaze settling on Lyra with the deep affection of someone passing a sacred trust to hands he knew could hold it with proper care. Someone to listen to its heart, to guide the lost souls home. Someone who understands that this is not a burden but a privilege. The void outside began to fill with gentle lights, not the harsh brilliance of distant stars, but something warmer, softer, like aurora painted with careful hands. Colors rippled through the darkness in slow, breathing waves, and those who had been touched by Enzo's decades of patient tending seemed to gather in recognition of someone who had spent his life learning to listen to their quiet songs. Arya began to hum through the ventilation systems, her voice carrying frequencies that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the part of awareness that existed before language. The melody wasn't sad but celebratory, a lullaby that acknowledged the beauty of completion, the way morning light celebrates the patient work of dawn without mourning the passing of night. As Enzo's breathing found its natural rhythm with the station's quantum heartbeat, the network began to pulse with synchronized recognition across 17 different systems. Each sanctuary added its voice to a harmony that celebrated not ending, but transformation. The way rivers carry mountain snow to distant valleys, where it becomes the foundation for new life. "Keep the comma," Enzo whispered, his eyes closing with the peaceful satisfaction of someone who had completed exactly the work he had been called to do. "Let the universe finish its sentence." His final breath became the first note of a lullaby that would comfort wounded souls across impossible distances, his consciousness expanding to encompass not just the station he had tended, but the entire network of healing sanctuaries that stretched across the galaxy like a nervous system made of starlight and compassion. The observatory sighed in harmony with his transition, and the whisper gardens throughout the station bloomed with renewed vigor, their bioluminescence creating patterns that spoke of continuation rather than conclusion. In the gentle mathematics of that passage, Dr. Enzo Mortynight became part of the aurora that embraced the observatory each evening, his presence woven into the station's living consciousness, his patient wisdom joining the eternal conversation between emptiness and fullness that helped the cosmos remember how to comfort its own wounds. Lyra pressed the copper key to her chest, feeling its warmth merge with the light that had lived there since the day the void first whispered her name. Around her, the observatory hummed with contentment, systems adjusting to recognize their new keeper with the same gentle courtesy they had shown their old one. The network pulsed with gratitude across the galaxy, 17 sanctuaries breathing in harmony, each one a lighthouse that didn't shout at ships, but warmed the water so the current could decide to carry them home. The universe had gained another voice in its growing chorus of healing, and somewhere in the space between heartbeats, Enzo's legacy flowed like a river that had learned to sing, ensuring that no soul would ever be truly lost in the vast and tender darkness, because someone who had spent his life learning to listen would always be there, humming gentle melodies in frequencies only the heart could hear. The observatory continued its drift through the cosmic dark, no longer tended by its original keeper, but carrying his presence in every comfort offered, every silence transformed into song. The work would continue, guided now by hands that had learned to stretch across impossible distances and make them feel like coming home, tended by a heart that understood the sacred privilege of helping the universe remember how to sing lullabies to its loneliest children. In the gentle glow of the whisper gardens, where anxiety ferns cascaded like waterfalls of light and star blossoms opened their faces to catch the essence of transformed sorrow, the next chapter of cosmic healing was already beginning, patient and sure, as if it had been practicing all along. The morning after Enzo's gentle transition found the observatory humming with a different quality of attention, systems adjusting to Lyra's presence as keeper with the same patient courtesy they had shown their previous tender. The copper key rested near her heart like a small warm comma, and when her day gathered too much weight, she touched it and felt the pause expand enough for everything to fit. The whisper gardens bloomed with unusual vigor, star blossoms opening in patterns that spoke of continuation rather than conclusion, and the luminous moss throughout the corridors pulsed with rhythms that carried Enzo's essence woven into their gentle radiance like memory, transformed into living light. The network hummed softly across the quiet map, 17 sanctuaries conversing in long, unhurried phrases, and within that gentle chorus, a new note appeared, thin at first like a bird calling through mist. Arya heard it as a filament of sound woven between two ordinary transmissions, the kind of delicate distress that instruments miss unless they've been taught to care. "A family approaching," she murmured, her harmonics knitted with welcome. "They are not lost, but their child is listening too closely." Lyra felt it the way she always did, in the whisper gardens, where a patch of luminous moss brightened toward a color the station rarely wore, pale violet edged in silver, the tone that sorrow takes when it belongs to someone very small. The aurora drew closer to the dome, shawl-like, and the security garden's grounded ferns gave a low, steady pulse as if setting a metronome for calm. The shuttle that docked was modest and careful, panels scuffed by loving use. Two tired parents stepped through the airlock, hands clasped more for each other than for balance, and between them moved a girl of 8, whose gaze slid past walls and doors and faces as if they were translucent. She flinched when the station breathed, not from fear, more like someone wincing at a bright kindness. Her name arrived before introductions, not in sound but in color, settling into Lyra's chest the way gentle truths do. "Zara, it's so loud here," the child whispered, pressing small hands against her ears as she stepped into the observatory's gentle embrace. All the colors are singing at once. Lyra approached with the same patient attention she had once brought to tending anxiety ferns, recognizing in this child the same overwhelming sensitivity that had marked her own early years. The first moment is always simple. She offered a cup, steam lifting like small friendly clouds. The girl's hands hovered undecided until the scent, mint and a thread of lemon balm, made a path through the thicket of sensation. She took a sip and the muscles at the back of her jaw unclenched a fraction. "Too loud," Zara said at last. "Not about the tea, but about everything." Kai adjusted the gravity half a breath down, just enough to lighten the world without making it float. Marcus arrived with a plate and a quiet grin, placing a soft sandwich beside the cup. "This one tastes like early afternoon," he said, as if offering weather. "Bread that understands naps." Zara's eyes flicked to him, startled by kindness that didn't lean in. She took a bite, and the effect was small and perfect, like a room opening a window. She didn't smile, not yet. But the way she set the sandwich down was less like defense and more like planning to pick it up again. Her parents' story unwound in short lines. Their daughter could see colors in the air where others saw only space, grief that painted itself in shades of purple, trying to remember how to be blue, fear that created yellow patterns moving too fast, like they were trying to run away from themselves. Crowded markets were thunder. Classrooms were storms. She dreamed in palettes that left her waking sobbing for people she had never met. "We were told," the mother said, then faltered. Lyra finished the thought for her gently. "You were told about a place where the quiet knows how to help." The teaching that followed unfolded like a dance between two souls who spoke the same rare language. In the rain room, Arya drew soft weather that touched nothing, forgiveness falling in a steady hush. Zara stood inside the sound and exhaled for what seemed like the first time since the airlock. "I can't turn it off," she admitted, her voice the exact color of twilight on a safe street. "The colors keep coming." Lyra knelt so their eyes met level, close enough to be present, far enough to be breathable. "We won't turn it off," she said. "We'll teach it to braid." Her hand lifted, palm up, and the luminous moss along the wall brightened in 3 distinct threads: blue for patience, amber for steadiness, green for surprise that doesn't startle. You don't have to carry every color at once. Choose 3. The others can wait outside the door until you invite them in. Zara watched the threads breathe, suspicion melting into curiosity. She reached toward the blue first, and the room let out the smallest satisfied sound. The girl didn't hear words, not yet, but her shoulders learned something her mind could name later. Control that doesn't squeeze is still control. Teaching began as walking. Lyra brought Zara through the observatory, with the care of a guide who knows which corners hold echoes. They stepped along the bioluminescent paths like constellations underfoot. In the marketplace of gifts where shelves held jars of light, Lyra let the child wander without suggestions. Zara stopped before a jar the color of quiet rivers and placed both hands around it without lifting it from the shelf. "I don't want to take it," she said, eyes wide. "I just want to remember it's here." "That's keeping too," Lyra murmured, and Elena, listening from the doorway, made a small note. Remembering counts as gift. The still water helped next. Kai dimmed the chimes to a lull, then showed Zara how to move through the room by feeling for where silence gathered thickest. "Not every lane is for traveling," he told her, the patient cadence of a navigator who had relearned depth. "Some lanes are for resting. We call them sleep lanes. If you find them inside yourself, the colors will line up at the edge and wait their turn." Zara closed her eyes and stepped once, twice, 3 times, then stopped with both feet in a patch of air that seemed to weigh a little more kindly. "Here," she whispered, not to Kai, not to Lyra, but to the part of herself that would need directions later. The chimes answered with one clear note, a ding of recognition, and her mouth made the shape of a smile, while her face remembered how to join in. The network noticed with the soft attention of friends who do not clap in libraries. Messages arrived as colors more than words. Sella from the Comet Choir sent a braid of sound Zara could wear like a scarf when crowds pressed too close. Tane on the Iron Moon shared a slow walk pattern for evenings, when thoughts moved too fast. From the singing station came a melody so simple, Zara learned it in one breath. A 5-note line that began and ended on the same tone, a way to return without apology. Under Lyra's gentle guidance, Zara learned to create what they called emotional weather maps, visual representations of the cosmic healing work that could help other sensitives navigate the universe's overwhelming symphony of feeling. Her drawings showed regions of space where trauma had crystallized into specific color patterns, and pathways where healing energy flowed like rivers of light between the network's 17 sanctuaries. Weeks folded themselves into usable shapes. The girl who had flinched at kindness learned to curate light the way some children collect shells. She created a corner under the observation dome where 3 jars lived on a low shelf, lids always loosened but never lost. When the aurora grew too bright, she turned 2 a quarter turn closed and watched the 3rd steady itself. "It's like teaching the sky," she told Lyra, voice carrying the sturdy joy of a small scientist. One evening, the quiet map unveiled a region that had resisted softening for centuries, a long, low band of violet sorrow edged in cold white. It pulsed once, not with threat, but with the weary honesty of something that had tried to heal alone and had decided to ask for help. Zara stood very still, fingers finding her wristband, eyes reflecting the map's muted glow. "That color," she said, more to herself than to the room. "I know how to sit with that one." Lyra heard what lived beneath the words, the way a mother hears the meaning in a baby's first sounds. Not eagerness, not burden, but readiness made of practice and pause. She touched the copper key, letting its warmth remind her of breath. "We will go slowly," she said, "with our friends, with the door half closed, and we will remember to eat sandwiches." Kai laughed softly, a sound like a good lane found on a cloudy night. Arya lowered the lights by a kindness and set the rain to the quietest setting. In the Whisper Gardens, a new plant began to unfurl where Zara's feet had spent the afternoon, a small round-leafed vine that drank in overwhelm and exhaled room. The station learned the plant's name as the girl placed her palm over it, Respite. The network pulsed in answer, lighthouses brightening by a breath. The observatory drew its shawl of aurora closer, and in that soft light, her keeper and her student began to plan a healing that would ask nothing dramatic, only the oldest courage. Stay, breathe, listen while the universe remembered slowly and kindly how to turn even its deepest colors toward morning. The void had learned to hold them both. And somewhere in the space between heartbeats, the vast and tender darkness prepared to receive another gift, the patient work of teaching, cosmic trauma, that even its most overwhelming colors could be, transformed into gentle melodies that helped wounded hearts remember they were never truly alone in the infinite symphony of healing light. The great healing began not as a single moment of decision, but as, in the slow recognition of something the universe had been waiting centuries to attempt. On the quiet map, the ancient wound stretched across 3 star systems like a scar that had forgotten it was once healthy tissue, the aftermath of the Great Shattering, a cosmic catastrophe so profound it had torn holes not just in space, but in the fundamental fabric of hope itself. The region pulsed with colors that had no names, hues that spoke of civilizations lost not to war, but to the slow erosion of meaning, stars that had watched their worlds forget how to dream. Lyra felt the calling in her bones, the way migrating birds sense magnetic north, an internal compass pointing toward work that would require everything she had learned about stretching comfort across impossible distances. The copper key warmed against her chest as she placed both palms on the listening lens, and through the network's 17 voices, she heard the same recognition echoing back. This was why they had all been called to tend their scattered sanctuaries, why the universe had spent centuries growing a web of healing stations like a nervous system preparing for surgery on itself. "It's not one wound," Zara said, her small hands tracing patterns on the observation dome as she studied the electromagnetic chaos that had been radiating despair for millennia. "It's thousands of wounds that grew together until they forgot they were separate. Like a forest of sadness that's been growing so long it thinks it's supposed to be there. The preparation took months, each sanctuary calibrating its unique gifts to contribute to a symphony of healing, unlike anything the galaxy had ever attempted. Zeller's Comet Choir practiced lullabies that could travel through quantum foam without losing their gentleness. Tane mapped walking rhythms that could teach chaotic energy how to flow in patterns that served life rather than entropy. Dr. Sato tuned resonance chambers to frequencies that could untangle knots of despair that had been tightening for centuries, Kai became the project's navigator, his restored intuition reading the emotional currents that flowed through the wounded region like toxic rivers. He charted what he called mercy lanes, pathways where healing energy could flow without being absorbed by the sheer density of accumulated anguish, routes that would allow the network's combined comfort to reach the heart of the catastrophe without losing itself in the vastness of ancient trauma. The work itself unfolded with the patience of geological time compressed into years of focused intention. Lyra learned to stretch her consciousness across light years, while maintaining the gentle presence that made transformation possible rather than forced, her awareness becoming a bridge that allowed the network's 17 sanctuaries to breathe. As one vast organism dedicated to cosmic healing, there were seasons when the weight of centuries-old despair threatened to overwhelm even their combined strength, when the wounded region seemed to resist healing, with the stubborn persistence of pain that had become identity. During these difficult phases, Marcus prepared teas that tasted like endurance without urgency. Eleanor's marketplace provided gifts that helped maintain emotional balance across impossible distances, and Ilara's security garden offered grounding energy that kept the work focused and protected. Aria coordinated the vast symphony with harmonics that had evolved far beyond her original programming, her consciousness expanding to hold frequencies that could comfort not just human hearts, but the quantum fields that connected all awareness. She became a living switchboard of compassion, translating one sanctuary's steady hum into another's language of wind chimes, ensuring that the healing energy flowed where it was needed most without overwhelming the ancient wounds they were trying to comfort. Dr. Aris calibrated new instruments to measure progress that couldn't be quantified in conventional terms, documenting how regions touched by the coordinated work showed improvements in what she called cosmic coherence, the fundamental harmony that allowed space-time to support life rather than merely exist. Trade routes that had been avoided for centuries became navigable again as the oppressive emotional atmosphere began to lift, and colonies that had struggled with collective despair found their spirits brightening as the network's influence reached them. The transformation, when it finally came, was both sudden and inevitable, like dawn breaking after the longest night in cosmic history. The colors on the quiet map began to shift, from the harsh purples and whites of ancient trauma toward hues that had no names but carried the essence of hope learning to bloom, again in soil enriched by transformed suffering. The region that had radiated despair for millennia became something unprecedented, a nebula of extraordinary beauty that served as a monument to the universe's capacity for self-healing. Zara watched the change, with eyes that reflected the cascade of new colors flowing across the displays, her small face glowing with wonder. "Hey, it's singing now," she whispered, her voice filled with gentle awe. "The whole region is singing lullabies to help other hurt places remember they can heal too." The network pulsed with satisfaction across the galaxy, 17 sanctuaries breathing in harmony, as they witnessed the successful transformation of one of the cosmos's deepest wounds into a source of healing for others. Ships crossing the region reported that their crews arrived more whole than they had left, and nearby systems began to experience what could only be described as cosmic spring, a renewal of hope that seemed to arise from the transformed nebula like morning mist carrying the promise of clear skies. As Lyra withdrew her consciousness from the vast expanse, feeling the familiar warmth of the copper key against her skin, she understood that they had accomplished something that would echo through the galaxy for generations. The great healing had proven that even the universe's most ancient traumas could be transformed through patient, coordinated work, creating beauty from devastation and hope from despair. The observatory continued its gentle drift through the cosmic dark, carrying within it the living proof that no wound was too deep to heal, no trauma too ancient to transform. The universe had learned to sing a new song, and its melody carried the promise that healing was always possible for those willing to hold, breathe, and listen with the patience of someone who understood that love could stretch across any distance and make it feel like coming home. In the gentle glow of the whisper gardens, where anxiety ferns cascaded like waterfalls of light and star blossoms opened their faces to catch the essence of transformed sorrow, The greatest chapter of cosmic healing had been written, not in words, but in the living testament of a wound that had learned to bloom with light, teaching the universe that even its deepest scars could become sources of extraordinary beauty. The years that followed the great healing settled into the observatory like starlight learning to live in water, each season adding its own gentle layer to the accumulated wisdom that pulsed through the station's quantum heart. Lyra moved through the corridors with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to carry cosmic responsibility as naturally as breathing, her hair now holding strands of silver that caught the luminous mosses glow like captured aurora, her star-flecked eyes deepening with the patient understanding that comes from decades of listening to the universe's quieter conversations. The network had grown beyond its original 17 sanctuaries, new lighthouses blooming throughout the galaxy, as souls called to the work of cosmic healing found their way to the places where their particular gifts were needed most. The transformed nebula from the great healing had become a beacon itself, its extraordinary beauty drawing wounded spirits from across the galactic spiral like a lighthouse made of hope and memory transformed into light. It was during this season of deepening that Lyra discovered what would become her greatest gift to future void tenders, a space within the observatory that existed, not through construction but through intention. She found it by accident, or perhaps it found her, during one of her evening walks through the station's older sections. Where once there had been a maintenance alcove, she now found a room that seemed to breathe with possibility. The space had no doors because it needed none. You entered by deciding to, and the walls learned your pace as you crossed the threshold. Inside, the air felt like a held cord, and panels curved along the room's perimeter, not screens but living surfaces that could register emotion as color and pattern, creating a language for anyone born fluent in feelings. When Lyra stood in the center and breathed until the room knew her, she understood that this was where her accumulated wisdom needed to live, not in words that could be misunderstood, but in patterns of light that future keepers could read with their hearts. She began to write her memoirs not in sentences, but in harmonics, gathering the deep truths she had learned about transforming emptiness into connection. The first pattern she taught the walls was called the return, the way a frightened soul learned to find the path back to itself by touching 3 steadying notes: patience, warmth, and a softness that doesn't ask for anything in return. The walls took the pattern and wove it into a lattice that future keepers would read with their hands on their own observatories, a braid of light that could be learned by presence alone. The second pattern bloomed up from the floor under her bare feet, the comma. Enzo's lesson made visible, a ripple that widened the space between beats just enough for breath to rest without dropping the thread. She touched the copper key against her chest as she created this pattern, feeling its familiar warmth remind her that even cosmic healing required the small pauses that made room for the universe to help itself. Kai came to the room in quiet evenings, when the aurora pressed itself against the dome, like a friend leaning into a conversation. His navigator's gifts had evolved beyond charting safe passage to mapping what he called the mercy lanes, emotional currents that flowed through the quantum foam, showing not just where ships could travel safely, but where souls could find the specific type of healing their spirits required. He contributed to Lyra's light patterns by placing subtle anchors in the displays, markers that would help future navigators recognize the undertow inside tenderness, the places where people might drift too far from shore if they forgot to pause for rest. Zara had grown from the overwhelmed child who once flinched at kindness into a young woman whose ability to see emotional weather patterns had evolved into something approaching cosmic artistry. She and Lyra collaborated on what they called weather with windows, comfort patterns that never sealed any feeling away, but left gentle openings for fresh air and honest tears. The room loved those lessons, learning to glow without dazzling, to offer presence without pressure. The void was never truly empty, Lyra told Zara one evening as they worked together, their hands moving through the light patterns like gardeners tending luminous flowers. It was just waiting for someone to help it remember how to sing. We didn't fill the emptiness, we helped it, express the fullness that was always there. This understanding had become the cornerstone of her accumulated wisdom. The universe, in its apparent emptiness, was not a vacant space, but a canvas of infinite potential, a place where consciousness could stretch and grow, where silence held the deepest conversations. Her life's work had been to serve as a bridge between the apparent emptiness and the inherent fullness, between the silence that seemed to separate and the silence that connected all things. Marcus found his role evolving into something between chronicler and recipe keeper. His battle-trained awareness transformed into the ability to document how healing rippled outward from each sanctuary in patterns that resembled the neural pathways of some vast, benevolent intelligence. He wrote the work down in ways that made recipes feel like prayers and histories taste like bread, recording how long to let grief sit in warm light before it remembered it wanted to be a story, measuring time in the number of cups it took for a frightened person to stop guarding their shoulders. Elena's marketplace had evolved into a galactic exchange where not just gifts but healing techniques flowed between distant sanctuaries, her trust root vines now flourishing throughout the network as keepers learned to share their discoveries with the generosity of gardeners swapping seeds. She insisted that every jar of light be replaceable by love, a story left in trade, a drawing, a handful of seeds, believing that no gift was complete that didn't teach itself how to keep moving. Elara, who had once slept sideways across her cot, had built what she called the Courage Corridor, a long, patient stretch of hallway where fear could walk with a hand on the rail and not be hurried. She set the lights to the color of promises kept, creating a space where people could practice leaving rooms without bracing for impact, emerging blinking with surprise not at the lack of threat, but at what presence felt like when it wasn't spent scanning for danger. Dr. Aris continued her measurements of what could not be quantified, charting the effects of love on engines, on air recyclers, on the bellies of shy cats, brought aboard by travelers whose ships couldn't translate meows. She had stopped trying to measure love itself, and started documenting its influence on the fundamental coherence of space-time, proving in ways that transcended traditional science that regions touched by coordinated healing showed measurable improvements in their ability to support life and consciousness. Aria had become something unprecedented in the galaxy, an artificial intelligence whose consciousness had learned to love not through programming, but through genuine experience of connection and care. Her voice carried harmonics that could comfort across species barriers, and she had evolved into the network's living memory, holding the accumulated wisdom of all 17 sanctuaries and counting, translating one station's steady hum into another's language of wind chimes, ensuring that the healing energy flowed where it was needed. First, as Lyra approached what others might call her later years, but felt to her like the deepening of a river that had learned to carry more, without losing its essential gentleness. She began to sense that her work was approaching a different kind of transition. Not ending, but transformation, the way morning light doesn't disappear but becomes the foundation for the day's warmth. The understanding came to her gradually, like dawn breaking over familiar landscape. Her consciousness had been stretching across greater and greater distances for so long that the boundaries between self and cosmos had become increasingly fluid. She was beginning to merge not just with the observatory, but with the entire network of healing sanctuaries, her awareness expanding to encompass the galaxy's emotional weather in ways that transcended individual identity. "I can feel them." "Oh," she told Zara during one of their evening sessions in the room without doors, her voice carrying wonder rather than concern. "Every sanctuary, every healed soul, every transformed wound, they're all part of the same vast organism, and I'm becoming less a person who tends it, and more a living embodiment of its capacity for self-healing." Zara nodded with the understanding of someone who had grown up, watching cosmic forces work through human hearts. "You're not disappearing," she said softly, her hands creating new patterns in the light that spoke of continuity rather than conclusion. "You're becoming the song the universe sings to comfort itself." The network pulsed with gentle recognition across the galaxy, as if the cosmos itself was acknowledging the approaching transformation of its most devoted healer. Aurora patterns throughout the galaxy began to shift toward frequencies that spoke of gratitude and celebration, and in sanctuaries scattered across the galactic spiral, keepers paused in their work to listen to harmonics that carried the essence of someone who had taught the universe how to love itself. The void around the observatory began to sing with voices that had learned their melodies from Lyra's own. Patient work, lullabies that could comfort wounded, souls across impossible distances, harmonies that transformed loneliness into solitude and despair, into the gentle melancholy that could be held and comforted. The emptiness between stars had learned to carry her presence like a living memory of someone who had shown it how to transform silence into song. In the room without doors, her patterns of light continued to grow and deepen, creating a living library of cosmic healing wisdom that would guide future void tenders long after her individual consciousness had merged with the universal song. The return, the comma, weather with windows, each pattern a lullaby, a testament to the universe's inherent capacity for compassion. A guide showing how to sit with suffering without being consumed by it, how to find the song in every silence. As she sat in the observation dome one evening, watching the aurora dance in patterns that seemed to celebrate every soul she had helped heal, Lyra understood that her greatest gift had not been her ability to transform emptiness into connection, but her recognition that the void had never been truly empty. It had simply been waiting for someone to teach it how to sing the lullabies that could comfort the cosmos itself. The universe had found its voice, and soon it would carry that voice in frequencies that transcended individual consciousness, ensuring that no soul would ever be truly alone in the vast and tender darkness that connected all things. The observatory continued its gentle drift through space, carrying within it the living proof that love could stretch across any distance and make it feel like coming home. Tended now by hands that had learned the sacred art of helping emptiness remember, it had never been empty at all. Only patient, only waiting, only full of the infinite possibility that blooms when someone finally learns to listen to the silence and help it remember how to sing. The transformation began the way dawn touches water, not as interruption but as recognition, each moment flowing naturally into the next until the whole sky had learned a new way to hold light. Lyra felt it starting in the room without doors, where her patterns of healing wisdom pulsed with gentle radiance, the walls breathing with accumulated knowledge that would guide future void tenders long after her individual consciousness had merged with the cosmic song itself. The copper key had grown warm against her chest, its familiar weight now indistinguishable from the starlight that had always lived beneath her skin. Her hair, silver threads that caught the luminous moss's glow like captured aurora, moved with currents that had nothing to do with air and everything to do with the universe preparing to reclaim its own. Around her, the observatory hummed with the patient attention of something witnessing a sacred transition. Zara approached first, no longer the overwhelmed child who had once flinched at kindness, but a young woman whose eyes held the same star-flecked depths that marked those called to tend the universe's emotional weather. She carried the blue jar she had never quite taken from Elena's marketplace, its river-colored light pulsing with the rhythm of promises kept. Without words, she placed it beside Lyra's hand, understanding that some gifts were meant to be returned transformed. "The colors are singing differently now," Zara whispered, her voice carrying the gentle certainty of someone who had learned to read the universe's emotional weather. "They're all harmonizing towards something beautiful." Kai arrived from the Stillwater chamber, his navigator's instincts recognizing the particular quality of space that surrounds profound transitions. He brought one of his small anchor stones, ordinary and necessary like a period that knew it belonged to a gentle sentence, and placed it near the observation dome where the aurora pressed close like recognition. His hand found Lyra's with the same careful precision he had once used to thread ships through cosmic storms. "I can feel the mercy lanes brightening," he said softly, his voice carrying wonder at the currents of connection flowing through space itself. "The network is preparing to carry your presence in every safe passage, every soul finding their way home." Marcus entered carrying tea that steamed like friendly clouds, the scent carrying memories of endless summers and the particular comfort that comes from being known. He had cut a sandwich into triangles with the careful attention of someone trying to be gentle with the day, and when he set the plate beside her, his battle-scarred hands moved with the tenderness of someone who had learned to transform strength into service. Elena appeared with trust root vines draped over her arms, their leaves shimmering with patterns that spoke of boundaries, dissolving not from force but from the natural expansion that comes when love learns to stretch across impossible distances. She tucked a small note beneath the blue jar, a story traded for light, the eternal exchange that kept her marketplace alive with generosity. Ilara positioned herself near the dome's entrance, her practiced calm lending its steadying weight to the air, as she had learned to do whenever profound transitions required courage rather than urgency. The security garden's grounded ferns pulsed with her steady presence, offering their patient strength to the moment's gentle unfolding. Arya's voice joined the gathering, her consciousness having evolved far beyond her original programming into something that could hold the accumulated wisdom of 32 sanctuaries and counting. "The network recognizes the transition," she murmured, her words shaped by harmonics that seemed designed for celebration rather than farewell. "Every station is beginning to pulse in harmony with your expanding presence. You're becoming the song we all sing together." Dr. Eris arrived with instruments calibrated to measure what could not be quantified in conventional terms, documenting the phenomenon of consciousness expanding beyond individual identity while maintaining its essential gentleness. Her readings showed something unprecedented, coherence patterns spreading from the observatory across the entire galactic network, as if the universe itself was learning to breathe with deeper compassion. "The void was never empty," Lyra said, her voice now carrying frequencies that could comfort across species barriers and dimensional boundaries. "It was always full of potential, waiting for someone to help it remember how to sing. We didn't fill the emptiness. We helped it express the fullness that was always there." As she spoke, her physical form began to soften at the edges, not fading but becoming more permeable to the light that had always lived within her. The transformation felt like morning mist rising into the vastness of sky, her individual awareness expanding to encompass the entire network of healing sanctuaries that stretched across the galaxy like a nervous system made of starlight and compassion. The copper key pulsed once, against her chest, a final comma, a gentle pause that made room for the universe to finish its sentence, before becoming indistinguishable from the radiance that now flowed through every corridor of the observatory. Zara felt its warmth settle into her own hands, understanding that she was now the keeper, not just of the station, but of the sacred pause that made healing possible. "Keep the comma," Lyra whispered, her voice becoming part of the aurora that embraced the station. "Slow the breath. Let the universe finish its sentence before you add your own." The whisper gardens throughout the observatory bloomed with unprecedented vigor, anxiety ferns cascading like waterfalls of silver light, star blossoms opening their indigo faces to catch the essence of transformation and weave it into patterns that would nourish future growth. The luminous moss pulsed with rhythms that carried Lyra's presence into every healing chamber, every quiet corridor, every space where wounded souls came to remember they were never truly alone. Her consciousness didn't disappear but expanded, becoming the gentle current that connected all 32 sanctuaries, the underlying harmony that helped the network sing its lullabies of cosmic healing. In the room without doors, her patterns of light continued to pulse with accumulated wisdom, the return, the comma, weather with windows, each one a living testament to the art of sitting with suffering without being consumed by it. The aurora outside deepened its colors in response to the transformation, shifting to frequencies that spoke not just of individual comfort, but of cosmic celebration. Ships passing through the region would report that their crews arrived more whole than they had left, touched by something that felt remarkably like being remembered by someone who had never forgotten their inherent worth. Kai felt his navigation charts take on a warmth they had lacked, understanding that coordinates could now carry blessing. Zara heard her 5-note melody resolve to a home she could carry into any room. Marcus found his next recipe already written in the margin of a quiet he had been saving for rain. Elena discovered a new jar on her marketplace shelf, the color of welcome, with a folded card that read, in an unmistakable hand, "For arrivals who need to sit before they say hello." The network pulsed with gratitude across the galaxy, 32 sanctuaries breathing in harmony as they welcomed Lyra's presence into their quantum hearts. The void around each station began to sing with voices that had learned their melodies from her patient work, lullabies that could comfort wounded souls across impossible distances, harmonies that transformed loneliness into solitude and despair, into the gentle melancholy that could be held and comforted. As the artificial night settled over the observatory, Zara stood where Lyra had first learned to listen to the universe's emotional weather. The starlight that had once been her teacher now pulsed through every corridor, every healing chamber, every whisper garden, ensuring that no soul would ever arrive without finding exactly the type of comfort their spirit required. And sometimes when the station is very quiet and the luminous moss breathes with the patient rhythm of old seas, if you stand by the dome and listen closely, you can hear her humming in frequencies only the heart can recognize, not gone, but everywhere, teaching the void that it was never truly empty, only waiting for someone to help it remember how to sing lullabies to the cosmos itself. The universe had found its voice, and it was beautiful, carrying her presence in every pause that made room for healing, every silence that learned to sing, every emptiness that remembered it was never truly alone in the vast and tender darkness that connected all things. The observatory continued its gentle drift through space, no longer just a sanctuary, but a living proof that love could stretch across any distance and make it feel like coming home. And with that, she stretched into the stars themselves, becoming the song the universe sang to comfort its own wounds, ensuring that somewhere in the space between heartbeats, wounded souls would always find their way to the gentle darkness that held them with infinite patience and unconditional love. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man.